All right, let's talk about something you've probably heard thrown around a lot, but maybe you don't know the whole story behind it: the waves of feminism.
Yeah, first wave, third wave, what does that even mean? We're going to break it all down. We'll look at the global history of these waves, and then we're going to see how it all played out in one country, Pakistan, to really get how a big global idea changes when it hits the ground locally. So, at its absolute core, what is feminism? Well, it's all about the pursuit of equality. The name itself kind of gives it away, right? It's a mashup of the Latin word femina, which means woman, and that ism suffix, which just means a belief or a principle. I love this quote from scholar Maggie Hum. She just cuts right to the chase. Feminism is the belief that women are human beings who should be treated as such. It's really that simple. It's about letting women reach their full potential just like men have always been able to. Okay, so the history of this whole movement is usually broken down into three waves. And, it's worth pointing out that this wave idea is a bit of a simplification. It mostly focuses on what happened in the West, but it's still a super helpful way to see how the goals of the movement changed over time. And if you look at this timeline, you can really see that evolution in action. We're talking from the 1830s all the way up to the internet age. Each wave really did build on what the last one accomplished, stretching that definition of what equality even means. So that first wave, it was all about one thing: getting a seat at the table. Seriously, we're talking about the most basic legal and political rights that were just completely off limits for women back then. Things like the right to vote, to own your own property, or even just to get an education. And they were not quiet about it. This banner is a perfect example of their tactics. I mean, check this out. They're right there at the White House, calling out the government's hypocrisy. How can you be fighting for democracy in other countries when half your own population can't even vote? It's a brilliant confrontational move. Okay, so after they won some of those legal battles, the second wave comes along, and this is where things get really interesting because they started arguing that real equality, well, it isn't just about laws. It's about our culture, our psychology, and all those invisible power structures that run our day-to-day lives. Right, so this is huge. The whole conversation shifts from the courtroom to the living room. It's all about challenging patriarchy. That's basically the system where men hold all the power. And they started talking about really personal stuff: reproductive rights, discrimination at work, domestic violence. And how they do it? Through things like protests, sure, but also these consciousness-raising groups where women could just get together, share their stories, and realize, hey, I'm not the only one going through this. And that brings us to the third wave, which takes all of that and adds two new ingredients: a brand new generation and a game-changing new tool called the internet. Yeah, this wave was way more assertive, and they totally embraced technology. You had these riot girl punk bands with their DIY attitude, and then you had online magazines, e-zines, that could spread their message of self-sufficiency all over the world, like instantly. Another really cool thing they did was focus on reclaiming language. They'd take words that were meant to be insults, words like bitch, and just flip them on their head. You had publications like Bitch Magazine that were all about this idea, basically saying, hey, if being a strong, outspoken woman makes me a bitch, then fine, I'll wear that as a badge of honor. So that's the global story, more or less. But it begs a really important question, right? This whole framework, it's mostly based on American and European history. What does it look like when you apply it somewhere completely different? To figure that out, let's take a look at our case study: Pakistan. And Pakistan's story is fascinating because it shows so clearly how the fight for women's rights isn't happening in a vacuum. It's completely tied up in the country's political ups and downs. So you can see Pakistan's waves follow their own unique timeline. And what's really driving it a lot of the time is the specific ideology of whoever's in power. It creates this constant push and pull, a story of major progress followed by serious backlash. And you can't get a better example of that whiplash than what happened during Pakistan's second wave. It is just staggering. First, you have the progressive era under Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, where the constitution actually guaranteed equality. But then, it's followed by General Zia's regime, which brought in these incredibly restrictive hudud ordinances. Get this. Under these laws, a woman who was a victim of rape could actually be punished for adultery if she couldn't find 4 male witnesses. It's unbelievable. And of course, this sparked a huge resistance, with groups like the Women Action Forum forming to fight back. Then, under General Pervez Musharraf, the pendulum swings all the way back again.
His government comes in with this official policy of enlightened moderation and a focus on women's emancipation.
And a huge piece of that was the devolution plan of 2005. It mandated this number, 33%. A full third of all the seats in local town councils had to be reserved for women. I mean, that is a landmark move, and it gave female political participation a massive boost at the local level. So this entire period saw some really concrete steps forward. You have the creation of a National Commission for Women, you have the reform of those awful hudud laws from the Zia years, and you see a huge jump in the number of women in the national government.
Okay, so we've looked at the global history from the 1800s all the way to a very specific national story. So why does all this matter? What's the big takeaway here?
Well, the conclusion from our source is actually pretty straightforward. Resistance is born from exploitation. The big takeaway here is that these feminist waves, it doesn't matter if you're talking about the US or Pakistan, they aren't just some abstract academic theories. No, they are direct, powerful, real-world responses to the inequality and exploitation women have faced all throughout history. And that really leaves us with one final thing to think about. If all the waves of the past were a direct response to the problems of their time, what about our time? When you look at the world today, what challenges, what injustices might be fueling the next wave?